We're at general auditions for a theater. In just a minute, you're going to come in from the wings over here and do your 2 contrasting monologues that you've been working on all week. The director, the casting director, the artistic staff, they'll be out in the house watching you do your stuff. It looks pretty simple, doesn't it? Empty stage, 1 chair. What could possibly go wrong? Don't be fooled. There's a lot of things at play here. We're going to cover 4 topics today. The first is how to take the stage and make it your own. The second will be understanding the difference between the space you're auditioning in and the space you'll ultimately be performing if you get the job. Third, we're going to talk about that guy out there, the chair, and how to use him. And finally, we're going to talk about how to gracefully exit the stage and still leave a strong impression. So, let's get started. If you're really nervous with your audition, that walk can feel like a lifetime. But it's necessary to get to this place, which is where you have to land before you make your introduction. And it's the first mistake a lot of actors make. Since we understand that the audition starts the moment we're seen on the stage, many actors start talking the moment they're seen on the stage. Meaning they start their introduction from back there all the way to down here. Huge mistake. There's Directing 101 says, it's stronger to walk, stop, and say your line than it is to walk and say the line at the same time. So do yourself a favor, in those first moments when you're coming out here to take over the stage and make it yours, walk out with a nice strong stride, hit your mark, look out into the house, say your name and what you're going to do. All right? That's the first step in taking over this space. The second one is a little more subtle, but just as important. And it has to do with this guy right here. If you walk out on stage and there's a chair already out here placed, it's actually telling you something. You see, the actor who was here before you used this chair in this spot to do one of their monologues. All right? This is the only set piece they had, and they created their environment, their world for that piece just by placing this chair. So when you come out here, you are in effect walking onto somebody else's set. And that's something that you can't allow for your own audition, because that actor may have been brilliant or they may have stunk. You'll never know. The most important thing is that they've left their set here, and now you need to move it off and clear it out. So after you've done your opening and announced yourself, turn around and move this chair. Now you may need to use the chair in your first monologue. Fine, move it to a different position. You need to break it. Because, like I said, right now, this is their set. Even just doing something like this changes the set. It's no longer the same environment they had. And it's really, really critical. You may also notice that when I came down stage, I got in front of this chair. Once again, that's another subtle little cue that says, this is my stage now, and I'm going to take it over. It's a nice sized theater, isn't it? Holds about 125 people. If I knew going into this general audition that if I got a job I would be performing here, great. I know exactly how much energy it's going to take to fill this space. But that might not be the case. You know, I might be auditioning for a summer stock Shakespeare company that just rented out this theater to hold an audition in. If that's the case and I know that piece of information, that's going to affect how I stage my audition. Knowing that if I got the job, I would be performing for 5, 6, 7, 800 people a night, more than likely what I would do is actually do my audition from far upstage, putting a lot of distance between myself and the director to show them that I can fill a large space and that I understand where I would be ultimately performing. Years ago, I had an opportunity to audition for a Shakespeare theater that had a house that seated about 700 people. I was auditioning for 3 different parts, and on the day when I walked into the room, it was a very large room, very long room, and then at one end was the director, and I introduced myself, and then the first thing I did was I turned around and I walked all the way to the other end of the room. Turned around, and almost with my back to the wall, I did my first piece. And then I walked about a third of the way to the director, did my second piece, and then I walked another third of the way and did my final piece. And I ended up, I was still probably a good 40 feet away from the director, which would be about the first few rows of the theater. because it was such a large space that I would be performing in if I got the job. He understood what I was doing, and I got hired. Now the reverse could also be true. Perhaps for whatever reason you're auditioning for a project on a large stage, but you'll be working in something this size or even smaller. That should also affect your decisions when you're staging your audition. Maybe you do want to get right down close with the director because there's only going to be a few rows, in the theater you're ultimately working on, even though the space you're auditioning in is a huge theater. Knowing that piece of information, where you're going to ultimately perform, is invaluable. If you have an opportunity to find it out, find it out. At most general auditions, you'll be provided a chair if you want one, but not always. Sometimes when you're having a general cattle call, as it were, and you're only allowed, say, 90 seconds or 2 minutes tops, they don't use a chair because they just don't have time to futz with moving that stuff around. So when you're rehearsing your piece, the piece that you're seated in, you should also be ready to be able to do it from a standing position and not be thrown by that. I like using a chair if I can in the context of having two contrasting monologues, if for no other reason than for the word contrast. If I have one piece that's up and loud and boisterous, by the very definition of contrast, I want something quieter and smaller and seated. All right? Now here's a particular problem that you might run into. Remember how I said when you first come on stage, you want to redefine the space as your own. So you want to move this chair if it's on the stage in some way. Well, what happens if you've rehearsed your scene all week with the chair in this exact position? You walk out on stage and you see that the actor who was here has left it in this position. What are you going to do? Well, here's a tip. When you're rehearsing the scene at your house, learn how to do the blocking in a mirror image of itself. Meaning, if you rehearsed it like this and you're talking to Dad here and Mom there, just something that simple. Now I'm talking to Dad here and Mom there. I've redefined the space, and I'm not thrown by the fact that the chair had to be in one particular spot. You should always be ready to tweak your blocking on a moment's notice if you need to. Oh, and one more thing. When you go to the audition, if you're actually talking to someone, that imaginary person in the scene, don't take the chair and put it down stage, turn it toward you and talk to the chair. The director really doesn't care if the person you're talking to is seated or lying down or standing or whatever. In fact, if you do something like that, you run the risk of blowing your chin down and having shadows fall across your face, and that's not good. All right? I mean, that might be okay when you're rehearsing the scene at home, but he doesn't need to see that at the audition. So you're finished with your monologues, and now it's time to leave the stage. How do you get off gracefully is the real question, right? Well, the first thing to remember is that you need to hold that last moment of that last piece just for a beat or two, and then come to a neutral moment, turn to the audience, nice big smile on your face, and say, "Thank you very much for your time," or something to that effect. Even if you're seated. Even if you're seated at the last minute, take a moment, stand up, come back down center, look them all in the eye. "Thank you very much for your time. Have a great day." And then a nice strong walk off stage. The worst thing you can do is have some dramatic moment and then immediately drop it. It somehow seems like that last moment was false then. Or to look out in the audience with a look of worry or anxiousness on your face, like, "I know that really sucked, I'm sorry." Don't apologize for your work. Be proud of it. You worked hard, okay? Stand on your own 2 feet here, look them in the eye with a nice big smile on your face and say, "Thank you for your time. Have a great day." Remember that, okay? Hopefully your next audition will go a lot better because you remember these few tricks I've taught you today. Break a leg.